And thanks to everybody for being here. Um, I did not, start off in my job planning to work with sex offenders, but over time, that became one of my jobs as a PO, and I liked the work enough that I wanted to do it as a therapist as well. And so I've spent a lot of time working with offenders. I won't be talking a whole lot about treatment tonight. That's where most of my experience is. But in working with these men, mostly men, but boys and some women as well, you can't help but learn a lot about how they came to offend. And so that's some of the information that we'll try to share here tonight is how can you prevent? I usually start this, and then I'll get to the title. When you hear the term sex offender, what comes to your mind? Raise your hand, or you can just blurt it out. I know everybody's eating, but I want to know what comes to your mind when you hear that term. Creepy, yes, creepy. That's a common one. Yes?
A lot of Law and Order SVUs, so that's
Okay.
right, wrong, or indifference. That's what pops into my head.
Law and Order. Okay, good. Good. Anybody else? Stranger danger is in the title. Predator is in the title. And those commonly come up. Those are words that many people think of. Pervert, creepy. Those are all words that come to mind. The thing about that I think is important for us to recognize is that the way the media tends to portray it and the way our laws target sex offending suggests that most of the dangers are from strangers, when in fact, that's not the case. Most sexual offenses occur with someone known to the victim. And so I guess I see a lot of heads nodding. This is not news to most of you. How many of you have actually done some studying and learning about this before? So you feel like you have some knowledge and awareness. Yeah. Well, that's good, because you're ahead of the game. Because a lot of people, when we look at the sex offender laws, registration, child safety zones, right? Offenders cannot live within 1,000 feet. Those things have been, or DNA testing as well. Those things have not been shown to reduce the risk that somebody's going to commit a new sexual offense. And those things tend not to keep our children safe. If all we do is rely on the laws and how we are informed about sex offenders around us, then we're not going to be doing enough to keep our kids safe, right? So I had a few stats here, and this gets to stats and myths about people who commit sexual offenses. 25% or more, depending on the data you look at, are family members. This can happen with people that are in our own home, right? Family members, direct family members. There are a lot of blended families, and the rates are even higher in a blended family. 70 to 75% are known. I think I may have mentioned that. It's not at all uncommon that we're going to know the person. And typically, it's only like 14%. 1 out of 7 cases is completely unknown to the child. So as much as we need to teach our kids about stranger danger and keeping themselves safe in public, because there are people out there who will snatch your kid, right? We've got to pay attention to that. To really be safe, we've got to dig deeper into this. Definitions of pedophile, that's one that nobody mentioned. When you think of a pedophile, what do you think of? Is it the same list? Creepy and the whole thing? A pedophile is somebody whose sexual preference is for pre-adolescent children. So they would prefer a young child over anybody else. Most of the men that I have treated over time are not pedophiles. Those are not, if that's all we're looking for, again, we're not going to keep our kids safe. The people who commit a majority of the sexual offenses are not primarily attracted to children. And so they're not the creepy, weird-looking person that we think we can kind of pick up in public, who sets off our radar. we may need to pay attention. And I'll say this, if ever you get a bad feeling, honor that. Pay attention to that. Don't ignore it. But that's not going to be the only person who's a threat to our children, right? As I've worked with people over the years, many of them, you would not recognize them. You would have no idea based on how they interact with others at work, who they're friends with, where they live, what type of work they do, their educational levels. You would not be able to recognize them in any way, shape, or form. In fact, many of them are very socially skilled. And this is part of how they're able to get away with sexual offending. I've got some numbers here about recidivism rates are very low, like 3% on average early in treatment. It goes up over time. But the thing to remember about that is that doesn't mean, typically when somebody gets caught and treated, their risk goes down a lot. These men can make great strides in understanding how they came to offend, and they can take steps to not do it again. They can actually reduce their risk to reoffend. But that doesn't mean they're cured. This is not a disease. This is not something you can take away from them. It tends to be about poor decision making, about not managing urges. There are many, many factors. When we, and I said I wouldn't get into treatment, and I'm not going to venture too far off into it, but when we're doing treatment with these men, we're now using what is called the Good Lives model, where we're trying to build up their skills in many areas of their lives so they can be more competent people, right? And that's, the thing about it is, I guess the reason I want to bring that up here is so that we all recognize this could be anybody. It's not, there's not a profile for a sex offender. Reoffense rates, some of these show that 14% of offenders commit another sexual reoffense after 5 years, 24% after 15 years. So even when we say reoffense rates are low, the idea that 1 in 4 people would do it again within 15 years, that's not low. I mean, it's low compared to other types of sexual offenses, but it's still a scary thing that if somebody's done this before, and because this is a thought process and there's a whole sequence to how they convince themselves that this is okay, if they've done it once, they can do it again. One of the really important things, this is where it gets tough when we start talking about people that are trying to protect their children. When I say these could be people in your own home, this can be brother and sister. Our offenders are not strictly male, and they're not strictly opposite sex offenders. The idea that if we leave our boys with a boy, they're going to be safe is not always true, right? Leaving our girls with a girl doesn't always mean they're going to be safe, right? Those are the type of assumptions that we cannot make, because when somebody's making that decision, it's typically not about their sexual preference. It's not a girl, adolescent girl who touches a girl. It may not be bisexual, homosexual at all. It has nothing to do with that in the moment, right? And I think that's one of the myths that we tend to think if a boy touches a boy, that means that's his sexual preference, and that's typically not what it's about. So to protect our kids, we have to know that anybody, really anybody, could be a threat to them. We'll talk a little bit about, well, thoughts on, and I tend to do this where I'm seeking audience participation. We're not set up great for that while y'all are eating, but why do you think people do this? Anybody got thoughts or theories?
When they're young, I think it's curiosity.
Okay, curiosity. That is probably the first thing that I hear from almost every single kid who comes through our program. It's curiosity, right? Now, the thing about curiosity is when they offend more than once against the same victim, it's harder to claim curiosity the second time, right? That's a piece of it, but that's usually not the only piece, right? Any other thoughts? Yes, Mary Linda?
Could it be because they were abused?
It certainly can be. That being a victim of sexual abuse does not predict sexual offending, but for many it is a factor. A lot of, it's similar to people who grow up around alcoholics or drug addicts. Some people, when they see that, they never touch a drop, they never do any of it, and other people are kind of normalized to it and they can fall into that. But it certainly can be a factor. Pornography is huge. This thing, our kids now, if they have one of these, they can get porn anytime, anywhere, like never before. And it's not, what anybody who's over a certain age thinks of porn, they think of girly magazines, right? That's not what we're talking about. This stuff is intended to be really high intensity to get our kids and our adults' attention and to really draw them in. And kids who start off looking at it on here, it interrupts and disrupts their sexual development. I actually refer to it as putting on sex goggles. If they watch porn enough, they see the world through the lens of pornography. Things that might never have occurred to them as a sexual object become so. And this is where we start talking about adolescents touching younger children, right? We think logically our 13-year-old son would never touch our 4-year-old son. And logically that's true. But if he's looking at porn, it is affecting his decision making. It is affecting the way he's looking at the world. Curiosity becomes a pressing need, and he may act on those urges, right? Many times, Carly, you brought up porn in terms of why somebody would do it. I've got previously abused. I've got primary sexual attraction to children. That's usually not it, right? So the other thing I wanted to get to on that, and this is, now we're starting to get into things that you can watch for as a parent. Grooming. How many of you have heard of the term grooming? Yeah, okay. Grooming looks a lot like flirting. It looks a lot like courting. If I hate the idea that when I took Monda to dinner and bought her flowers, I was grooming her. But many people would look at those behaviors in terms of the similarity in what we're trying to do. The difference with grooming, though, is that there is a hidden agenda. And we are trying to prepare somebody to actually go down a path with us they don't even know that they're going on, right? And they're not prepared to handle. Some of the things that go into grooming, secret keeping, right? So an older sibling, step sibling, babysitter, whoever it may be, catches a kid doing something wrong, and they say, I won't tell your parents, right? And now they're already, just that little act right there establishes you and I have a secret-keeping relationship where we protect each other. We don't tell on each other. It can start as simply as that. It can be getting them things. It can be, giving them their dessert. There are lots of ways that our victims get groomed, but parents get groomed as well, right? When we give our trust to somebody, we just have to be really, really careful who that's going to be. Because, again, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but Eddie Haskell, right? Not suggesting that he played a sex offender in any way, but the whole over-the-top being so nice to the Cleaver parents is kind of a good analogy for that. that when somebody is trying to, if they have thoughts about touching a child, they may try to get close to the parents. I feel like I always have to give a caution here because I don't want to turn us all into these mistrusting, suspicious people who never look at somebody the same way. There are some people who are just trying to be good and kind and helpful, but we just have to make sure that we're discerning about how it is. Those people are not going to try to get our kids alone. Those people are not going to try to put themselves in a situation where they're isolated with our children. And those are some of the things to really, really pay attention to. Babysitting is a hard one because I think all parents need to be able to get out and enjoy and have breaks from their kids. But you've got to be real cautious about who you're going to have around your children. Thoughts or questions to this point? I know we were going to do them at the end, but does anybody have a question right now? Yes?
What is the age of the victims? What would you say is more common age?
Mostly post-pubescent. So it's going to be kids who have reached puberty. The most common age range is 12 to 17. They make up close to half of the victims, right? The internet, Carla also mentioned, there are so many people out there right now trolling for our kids. Now, we really are getting into predator territory there. And the internet and the phones have made it so easy for them because they can cast a very wide net. They can throw out 100, probably more, instant messages trying to hook up with kids. And all it takes is one to talk to them. And they can be very, very elaborate. Long story, but I'll make it brief. A grown man created a profile for a teenage boy, befriended a girl online in another state, talked to her a lot. They were just friends, they were buddies. He disappeared for a couple of weeks. He came back online, told her he had cancer, and it didn't look good, and he stretched this out over months. And the 13 or 14-year-old boy's dying wish to this girl was to meet up with his father. So this man had this elaborate plan, and he hooked her in emotionally, and she wasn't telling her parents any of this. And he got arrested because somebody got tipped off when he flew her across the country. So he got a federal crime. But these are the internet. If you're going to give your kids these, it's so important to be able to monitor them, to have some kind of communication with them so that they know the dangers, but that they also feel comfortable talking to you about it. And I think, that can be a really, really difficult thing. But I think we're better off our kids not having them and being mad at us than having just unlimited access. Because this is where I think we've gone from be careful in your home to you never know when it could happen, right? That we used to worry about somebody driving by and grabbing a kid from a park, and now they can create opportunities through the internet and through communications with our kids. So that's definitely an important piece of this. Okay, so how do we help our kids? I think one of the important things to do is you got to have conversations with them, right? You got to be able to talk to them about some of this, and it can be really uncomfortable. But if they are not aware of what's going on, and maybe worse yet, if they find out what's going on from their friends and not from us, then that becomes the source of their information. That becomes who they rely on. They may go say, this creepy dude sent me a text to their friend, but that friend, they're going to giggle, they're going to laugh, and you don't know where it's going to go from there. It becomes really important that they know that they can talk to us. Just some of the little things, showing an interest in our kids' day-to-day lives, getting to know the people in their lives, making sure that we know their friends, right? And that we're monitoring who they're friends with online. Choosing those caregivers really carefully, talking about media, talking about the images that they see, how they're influenced by the sexual nature of TV shows, music, all of that kind of thing. Making sure that we communicate with them. I want to go over this real quick, fairly quick. The physical signs. So let's say abuse has already occurred, and sadly that, we certainly hope it's not going to happen to anybody in here, but there are sexual abuse cases occurring every day. What do we look for? How do we know if our child has been touched? Physically, we're looking for, it can be bleeding, it can be bruising, difficulty walking. There are some signs that a child has been violated that we need to pay close attention to, right? Anything out of the ordinary with your child, pay close attention to that, especially if it is in the we tend to talk about the bathing suit areas, right? So if it's covered by your bathing suit, that's your private area, and if we as parents see any physical problems or issues there, we at least need to be asking questions. Behaviorally, our kids may change the way they do hygiene. One of the way a kid, without even knowing that they're trying to put off an offender, is to quit taking care of themselves, to quit bathing, to try to make themselves as unattractive as possible. Some of the clients I've worked with, they would eat themselves into misery to try to become unattractive to their abuser. They may develop phobias. They may become depressed, right? If there's a big change in how often they sleep, in how often they interact with the family, if they start isolating themselves, pay attention to those warning signs. They may become suicidal. They may suddenly have a change in school behavior, whether it's getting in trouble or their grades drop. Nightmares, bedwetting. Many sexual offenses have been discovered when a child victim starts touching other kids, right? So they start acting out some of what's been done to them in a daycare setting or something like that. Anything you see like that from your kids, just take it very seriously. An older kid may really start watching out for younger siblings. So if there's an abuser in the house or an abuser in the family, and all of a sudden the oldest girl starts objecting whenever the younger kids are going to go over to that person's house, there's something going on there, right? They don't know how to express it, but they're going to try to protect their younger sibling. Thumb sucking, they may go back to, we already mentioned bedwetting, they may regress in some ways. They may harm themselves. Cutting is a really common, and it's become worse because it's a common topic for the kids, but it is a way to kind of numb, and they get, when you talk to people who cut, they get relief from it. It focuses everything there, it releases chemicals on the brain, and it is something they do to self-soothe. If you see your kids suddenly shrinking away from physical contact, they used to want to climb up in your lap and hug, they used to want to cuddle, and now all of a sudden they're very standoffish. Those can all be signs. So to wrap, encouraging them to speak up, trying to establish dialogues with them, making sure that you're available, giving them the chance to raise the topic or to talk to you about things that are going, asking open-ended questions to try to get them talking. And being really aware of the signals that we're putting off as we talk to our kids. This is one of those where kids tend to blame themselves and when they're victims of almost anything. And if they pick up from a parent or grandparent that somebody's in trouble, it can often cause them to pull away and not speak up. Kids, this would be a whole nother topic on why kids don't share, why they don't feel comfortable doing it. They're oftentimes protecting the perpetrator. If it's a grandfather, they don't want to see the grandfather get in trouble. But there are lots of reasons. So making sure our kids know you're not going to get in trouble. It's not your fault. And we want you to share with us becomes a really important piece of this. So That's what I had on the list tonight. Anybody got questions, thoughts? Yeah.
When is it appropriate to talk to them about it? I mean, I have a 2 and 8 months, I don't think it's quite right yet.
Right.
But like even with my 2-year-old, right, like what's an appropriate way and time to talk about it?
So you kind of go developmentally, you want to match what you're going to share with them. I think the good touch, bad touch, and the bathing suit, the private areas is a good way to start that. And really, with that, as soon as they can communicate, some of the horror stories about little ones being touched before they can speak, there are too many of those. But then, as the child grows and develops, you want to get into more specifics and share the dangers. Okay, the reason we covered the bathing suit area and good touch, bad touch is because there are people out here who may try to do this. Yeah.
So as a mom of an 8 and a 6-year-old, to go with it, is that now? Like, is now that, because it feels like it's scary early that they need to know about looking out for those things.
Yeah. This is one of those where we don't want to scare them, right? But we definitely want them to know that there are dangers out there. They are not too young to be targeted. Yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't it help to keep them very busy? I mean, I think back when I did have that age kids, and they were in all the sports, and, I mean, we were worn out, and so I know they were.
Right.
So I think that surely would be a way to keep them,
Well, I think having happy, healthy kids, confident kids, all of those things are good for them. But we have to recognize, how many stories have we heard from the media of coaches, doctors, people who have access, teachers who exploit. And we tend to trust our coaches and our team doctors. And so when they go on a weekend tournament trip and we can't go, so are those good things? Yes, they are. But are they enough to keep our kids safe? They're not. Even, we were talking earlier about the idea of letting your child go to a public restroom by themselves. Every parent has to decide when that's going to happen. 28's too late. We can't wait that long. So when is it okay? And we may need to send them in pairs. There are lots of things, but again, it's a mixed message. Most offenses occur in the home where they know them, but those things are still out there. People who do that are still lurking. So it's not, and where you are, no matter how well you know people, the thing that scares me the most about the phones and the pornography is we have people who never would have considered sexual offending who are now thinking about it. And so there is no place that's safe. Church's not safe. Their school, the school where you've had all your kids and your grandkids go, we can't know that it's safe. It may be safe, but we can't assume that it's safe. And maybe that's one of the biggest messages. Don't assume that any place is safe, because you just don't know. Yes?
What is the punishment when they get arrested? What is usually what happens then?
Most get probation. So adults and juveniles. Our kids, as Carla said, I worked in the residential treatment program, and at its capacity, well, we were not supposed to have more than 30, but we had 48 at one point when I was in the last 3 years. That's a lot of kids who are actually in a lockdown facility for sexually touching somebody. Right now, I think they have 10 or 11, right? But most of those kids get probation. When we're talking adolescents, if the victim's in the home, they can't go back home until the victim has had therapy and the victim's therapist says they're ready. That was a big adjustment for me because I came from adult. And in adult, if you touched a child, you almost never got one-on-one access with kids. It was very rare. You would sometimes later get supervised contact, but that was the exception. The punishment ranges go from 5 to 99 for if a child under 14 is sexually touched, it's automatically a first-degree felony, and they can actually get 99 years. They can get a life sentence. But it can also go as low as 2 to 10 for certain kinds of touching, a third-degree felony. Yeah. And then if it's a non-contact, it can be a misdemeanor. So there's a really wide range, but I'd say most are going to fall in the felony range, and they're going to get probation. Adults for 6 to 10 years, and kids are going to get 2 to 3 years of probation. That's probably average.
My question was, what should we do if we suspect something has happened? What's the process? Who do we call? Do we call you?
You can call me, yes. I'll refer you. But the Child Advocacy Center, in an area like this, there are lots of good resources. The Child Advocacy Centers, whether you're in Dallas or Plano, Collin County has really good programs. Most larger counties in Texas and probably throughout the country now have government facilities that are designed just to talk to the kids and work with the kids. Now you can contact the police and they've got good working relationships. Typically a child will be taken to a forensic interview with an expert, somebody whose only job is to talk to kids, to make them comfortable, to get them really to recognize that they're not in trouble. They record them, they try to do their best to make it a smooth transition. But I think, Celia, is going to be getting them to an expert as soon as possible. Too often in the past, I think kids were taken to someone who the family trusted, who wanted to keep it, let's don't make a big deal out of this, right? And I think too often these offenses were kind of either talked through or worked through in the family or at the school level. And when I talk about low recidivism rates, I'm talking about after somebody gets caught and gets treatment. When somebody gets caught and gets no treatment, these numbers don't apply to them. There are times when they offend the same victim hundreds of times. The numbers are staggering.
I was going to ask about mandatory reporters. Some people are mandatory reporters. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I couldn't even give you the whole list. I know that I am, right? If somebody tells me, if one of my clients as an LPC tells me that they have been sexually abused, if it's a child, I have to report it. That is one of my obligations. And in fact, I can lose my license if I don't. Teachers are going to be on that list. I think clergy are on that list. I would urge anybody in a position of authority over a child to pass this on. Because if you try to handle it yourself, you really don't know what you're getting this child into, the perpetrator into. Because, and here's the flip side of this, too often the families I work with have both the victim and the perpetrator in the home. So as hard as it is to put ourselves in the position of a parent with a child who's been abused, what about the parent of the child who did the abusing? Because they're going to be just as scared, just as confused, and want to keep their kids safe. And then when it's the parent of both. And so I urge you, whether you're required by law or not, to take this to somebody else. If it's really something that can be smoothed over, it will. If it's a misunderstanding, I rarely saw people come through who did not do it because the system culls them out. You've got an angry parents getting a divorce, and one of them's gonna, all right, I'm gonna fix him or I'm gonna fix her, and they make up a story. those folks don't get prosecuted. It may go into the system, but it's very rare, very, very rare. And in fact, just to throw that in, if you come across somebody that you know is a registered offender, if they say, I didn't do it, they're going to be certain, just be cautious, because most of them have a story to explain it away. You know, I was 19 and she was 16, but she told me she was 18. Those kids rarely get prosecuted. They do sometimes, and by law they can, but I think it's really important to take it to the legal system and let them work it out, because the offenders need treatment. If we sweep it under the rug and we get promises, they may even mean it when they say, I'll never do it again, but that doesn't mean they'll never do it again. They really need the help. Yes?
What are signs of grooming? So you mentioned like signs of when a kid is abused. What are signs of them being groomed?
It may be, so if you're just talking to your kid, if suddenly there is an older kid that seems to get a lot of their attention, and or they talk about them a lot at home, and it seems like a special connection, it's just something to pay attention to. It may not be anything. We got a lot of wonderful kids here who really work well with our youth. They're not grooming our kids, right? But it's getting that sense of this seems like more than usual, and then keeping an eye on those relationships, making sure that you're watching. So if there is, and I hate to say it, but typically there are more male offenders than females. If it is a male giving your child extra attention, that is even more of a warning signal. You just have to pay attention to that. It doesn't mean girls don't, because they do. And again, I won't hold up my phone to say porn again. But again, if girls are watching more porn now too, and they are crossing the line of sexual offending more frequently. So you can't rule out a girl, but if it's a boy, just watch, really pay attention. You know, anything that seems out of the ordinary to you as a parent, trust your gut. And you can even talk to the kid, you know, not ask if they're grooming, right? But you can get to know them too, and you'll get a sense. I think typically if a kid is targeting your child and you go and talk to that kid, they're probably going to back off. They're probably going to get a little bit scared. So go ahead and confront it directly. Yes?
There are times when victims have a difficulty recognizing that they're actual victims, admitting it, or wanting to get treatment, forensic exam, that kind of thing. Is there any way or tips to encourage these individuals? Because at times they feel like they're getting re-victimized.
Yeah. So I think one of the keys there is going to be the early discussions, you know, so that this is something, if we start talking to our kids at a very young age about this and about the possibilities and about if you feel this, if somebody touches you here, you speak up, we're moving them closer toward that. Now that doesn't mean that's always going to be successful. I think it really comes down to making them feel comfortable. You know, when I said these interviewers at the advocacy centers are professionals, that's literally their primary goal, is to reassure that child that they're safe, that they're not at fault, and that this is going to be the best thing for them. So trying to get them just to go talk to somebody like that and trying to reassure, you know, anticipate their fears, anticipate the shame that they're going to have. It's a little treatment thing, but it has to do with this piece of it. The difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is feeling bad about something I did. Shame is feeling bad about who I am. Reassuring our kids that have been victimized that they're not that. They're not the victim. They're not responsible, but that this is an isolated thing. Yes, it happened, and we're going to work through it. But just trying to reassure them in every way that we can. So I don't know if that fully answers it. It's not always going to work with every kid, you know, but I think you stay with it. If you have one that just refuses, doing your best over time to support them and keep conversations going. You know, the last thing we want to do is assume our kid's okay and just write it off and let them handle it themselves, because that's when we're going to start seeing these other behaviors, right? Because they're not ready to do that. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah?
This is kind of a weird question. Where is the line between, don't get me wrong, I think all looking at porn is bad and all that. But where is the line between someone who, looks at porn and then just goes on their way, and somebody who looks at it and then becomes a sex offender?
Well,
How, I mean, I don't know. Is it determined by length of involvement in that? Is it a lot, or is it other factors, or is it just a decision some people make, pure and simple, or what is that?
it's not a weird question, but it's a complicated question. It really is, because when
Lots of, as we know, adolescent and pre-boys that.
yes. Yes, they really, really do. And not all of them, you know, when I do a talk with adults, I didn't even bother saying it in this setting, but when I do it outside of a church setting, I kind of throw in a disclaimer that says, I'm not ridiculing people who watch porn and don't sexually offend. Because a lot of times when I'm looking out at a group of people, I may be looking at 80% of them who watch porn. If I just say porn is evil, they don't hear another word, right? So statistics say that there are people who watch porn, who dabble in it, who watch it some, who think it's part of an exciting sex life, and they'll never sexually offend. The trouble, and maybe this gets to the heart of your question, is we can't predict who's going to cross the line because of it. Right. Yeah. When I'm working with an offender, adult or adolescent, we're going through all of the factors that were present in their lives. And there's a list from research of the different things from, anger management problems can be a predictor, to relationship problems, to attitudes about sex and about women. Men who think women are inferior are higher risk to sexually offend than men who look at women as partners. And so a lot of those things are going to go into how the man viewing porn digests it and how it affects his behavior. So I could tell you, if there were 10 other factors available and he's watching porn, I'd tell you, don't let your kids around him.
How much does just pure maturity factor into it? Or do you have people, like new to you who, in all the other areas of their lives, they're very mature?
Right.
Or are they, for the most part, immature in many aspects of their life?
So I'm going to say that they appear mature, but they're probably not. Right. Yeah. So they may look really smooth and accomplished and mature, but they're probably not. They may be very domineering in the home. They may have really bad attitudes about other people. They may have a lot of other things going on, but they may appear mature. Outside of curiosity, the second most common thing I hear is it just happened. It never just happens. Never. There are always multiple steps. It is a process. When I have a kid who said it just happened, well, why didn't it just happen at the dinner table? Because I'd get caught. So it didn't just happen, right? It's never a sense of, oops, I did it and I didn't. There's always planning, there's always preparation. Sometimes it's quick. When we have these men who expose in public, they may be cruising along not necessarily planning to expose that day. They see an opportunity and that they act on it, but they've planned out how they approach and how they escape, and there's still planning that goes into it. So, yeah. Maturity is hard to measure, and so it's really not in any of the research, but poor problem solving is, impulsivity is. There are some things that indicate they're not mature that are part of it. Did you?
I was just gonna say, do you think like there's a charm factor of the person? They have a way of, and then the other person is innocent to that and doesn't pick up on, I don't know, I just.
Yeah, typically.
Watching some of the Netflix.
Yeah, right, and Law and Order. They're typically good at manipulating other people. Yeah. Now you're going to have some that are not, but they'll find other ways. That's one of the things the internet has opened up, is opportunity for somebody who has zero social skills to contact 100 people in a day and strike up conversations with them as if they're smooth and suave and, you know, educated and all that. Yeah.
What about advice about cell phones and kids, more safety advice?
Yeah, there are a lot of programs out, you know, Net Nanny and some of the others. The problem that I think exists with those is that our kids are smarter than most of us with the technology. If there's a way to get around those programs, they're going to know it typically before we are. So it's a, you know, I think establishing rules with your kids, when you're going to let them have them, what features you're going to have on them. The trouble with just, if we say none and they go to public school, they're going to have access. You know, when we actually in Wiley, at a T3 conference, there was a presentation on porn, and we got together a group after and talked about it, and every kid from public school had seen porn, not on their own phone. They had seen it through other kids. I still think it's good to, I think it's just one of these where it's best to be strict and to err on the side of caution with our kids. We'd rather, I need to know what you're doing with that thing. Yeah, you can't just have free reign with it. I think it's a huge risk. Yes?
I know several Christian families who confided in me about their sons who were using porn. None of them went to public school.
Yeah, right. Public school is not, yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, it's not, it's certainly not exclusive to that. Yeah, because they can find out. You can search, you can mistype something in a Google search, and yeah, so there are lots of ways. And you know, the earlier kids get exposed to pornography, the more likely it is to mess up their development.
I heard an age one time, but what is, do you have the average age that a child would be exposed?
Boy, I'm trying to think the last, I think it's preteen.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
heard 7 years old was like sort of the average that a child was exposed to it.
Was, yeah. I don't remember seeing 7, but
Right, it's probably,
yeah,
that might be the earliest.
right. But
It's very young.
preteen, yeah. Other,
There was, I will mention, we went to McDonald's family, road trip, yeah, some family road trip, and the minister from Rockwall, that is also a counselor, he has like a resource on his website that's, it's a plan to reduce media in your home and like how to handle it in your home. I don't remember the website right now, but it's like a 6-week plan to help reduce
okay.
how much you let your kid on your
Yeah.
tablet or whatever, and like, yeah, it was pretty interesting. And
I bet.
like rooms that you're only allowed to have them in certain places.
Yes.
Like a public, anyway.
Well, and actually, I should have, the question earlier about phones, no phones in the bathroom, no phones in the bedroom, right? If you're going behind a closed door with your phone, there's way too many bad things can happen rather than good things. So, yeah, I think the public settings are a really good idea. Yeah. Did you have another Yeah.
You have to ask permission for everything. What scares me is how early it starts. My kids were watching the Disney Channel, and they had a commercial right in the middle of a cartoon for 90 Day Fiancé. You had all, I mean, no little kid is watching a Disney cartoon is gonna watch. You know, you're not gonna watch Bluey, and all of a sudden you have these, every body parts are hanging out.
Right.
And what they're talking about is very mature things, and I'm thinking, man, they're trying to get our kids even younger.
Yes, right. Yeah. Well, and even if it just creates a question and they go ask a friend instead of us,
Right.
there's the danger of opening it up. Yeah.
I was babysitting with my 4-year-old granddaughter a long time ago. And she came in to me, because I put her in front of cartoons,
Mhm.
because I was doing something in the kitchen. And so I was watching her, and it was SpongeBob or
Mhm.
somebody like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she came over into the kitchen, and she said, Mimi, this show is inappropriate. And I said, SpongeBob? And she said, yes. And so her family,
Yeah.
I mean, I looked at it, it didn't seem that inappropriate, but I guess it.
Yeah. Well, oh, it certainly
You
got
don't
stuff.
even know it, and
Right.
it was a cartoon.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's another area, making sure we know what our kids are consuming media-wise and what they're watching. YouTube, they can get all kind of stuff on YouTube. Yeah, YouTube.